A happy Tuesday to you, Central Georgia. Hopefully the start of your shortened work and school week is off to a good start. And hard not to be with some of the cool temperatures that we had this morning and some of the brilliant images of the sunrise all across Central Georgia. So first things first, let's actually go ahead and dive into the numbers. 57 was our record low set back in 1934, excuse me, and most recently back in 1999. Well, we did match that number. We got confirmation from the National Weather Service that it wasn't a rounding error this time around. I had a forecasted low of 59 degrees, and we took it a little bit farther than that threshold this morning. We officially recorded 57 at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. So you likely won't see that box change by the time we get a year out into the future and see 2025 by that number. It goes by the earliest date that that number was set, and that would still be 1934. We didn't quite get low enough to clock a 56 on there, but still it is saying something that this is the second time in as many weeks that we've been making a run at some of the record lows. And in fact, this week we did at least match the record here in the Macon area. So a bit of a chill in the air as you walked out the door, but now temperatures are continuing to warm up. We'll go ahead and break down your full forecast, but overall, it is still remaining a relatively dry stretch of weather and a relatively quiet stretch of weather over the next 7 days. We will see a warming trend day by day in light of kind of the uneventful forecast that we have. We don't have any big scale weather systems impacting us besides a couple of fronts, but they're really just going to kind of reinforce the drier air that is present all over the area right now. We do have very little rain chances in light of the less humid atmosphere that we continue to work with, and then a mostly dry week ahead. And then once we transition into the end of the weekend, into the beginning of next week, that's where we have some talking points and maybe your next best shot at some rain. But overall, it's going to be a story that looks like this just about each and every afternoon. Nice blue skies, excuse me, all across our quad view on the sky cams, Georgia National Fairgrounds, Warner Robins, down to Dublin, where that blue is looking very, very vibrant. And then you can get a glimpse of some higher level clouds out in the distance, but overall, it doesn't look like that cloud cover is really impacting your forecast in Central Georgia. Taking a look at your current temperatures. So they are continuing to warm up accordingly, somewhere around 70 to maybe 73 degrees here just before 11 a.m. But these numbers were down into the upper 50s and the low 60s all across Central Georgia this morning. So it's already been about a 10-degree increase for many of these areas. Taking a look at 73, how does that match up with some of our neighboring states? Well, you can see that areas like Montgomery directly over to the west, 72 degrees, 75 in Charleston. But then as you go down in Florida, that's where you still find some warmer temperatures. And once again, an 83 in New Orleans is going to take the cake for the warmest number that we do see here on this Tuesday morning. And farther up to the north, you can still see that this cooler and drier air mass is still really dominating the forecast. 69 in Indianapolis, 67 in St. Louis, 72 up in Lexington, a little bit warmer over into Nashville, and then up the east coast of the United States. You can see this is probably where the coolest air does remain, along the Appalachian Mountains, 70 degrees in Charlotte, 73 in Virginia Beach, and a 71 up in Washington, D.C. So hinting that this trough of cooler air, it has been very widespread farther over to the west as of recent days. It does look like it is steadily drifting over towards the east, so now more so present in the northeast United States as opposed to all across the Midwest. Here's a look at the dew point temperatures. Not too much change in these, but we have seen a steady increase since the morning time frame. So along with the temperature increase, a lot of these dew point temperatures have made their climb back up above the 60-degree mark, but still not very, very humid by any means. 66-degree dew point at the warmest. That is definitely something we will take here as we go into these last couple of weeks of the summertime season. So pretty much predominantly dry air remains in the forecast. And farther up to the north, especially up in northeastern Georgia, where the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains lie, that's where you're going to get substantially drier air. And as the Appalachian Mountains go through eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, it doesn't look like we have too many muggy areas in the near vicinity. The closest would be down towards St. Simons and Brunswick and Cumberland Island, and then riding down the Atlantic coast as you go down into the Florida Peninsula and back over here to the west in states like Mississippi. And that's going to continue to contribute to some scattered rain chances over in those states. but that's not the scenario that we're dealing with here. So pretty much predominantly dry air, or a lot drier than we're usually used to, and along with that, some cooler temperatures. So your feels like numbers still very accurate of what the actual temperatures read. You might see a little bit of a difference, but it still feels like the lower portion of the 70s as we go into the late morning time frame. The winds and the wind gusts, these were a big talking point yesterday. We had a pretty substantially breezy day, maybe some gusts up to 20 to 25 miles per hour. Well, right now we're not recording any wind gusts. We are just seeing a steady breeze of about 5 to 10 miles per hour. It's farther over to the east that you can see some of those winds are a bit gustier, where you're starting to pick up on some faint shades of yellow, and that's where the wind arrows are moving a little bit quicker, but that not going to really play a role in our forecast. I think this blue color will be widespread throughout the duration of today, and then once we go into the evening hours, that's when we're finally going to look at the winds to subside and really start to die down before we walk out tomorrow morning, and we're not dealing with much of a breeze whatsoever. So 83 for a high temperature yesterday. That was 7 degrees below average for this time of year. Your morning low temperature of 63 degrees, about 6 degrees below average this time of year. So 63 yesterday, didn't really even make a run at the record of 56 set back in 1999. Just judging from today's record and yesterday's record low, 1999 seems like it had a very similar setup to what we have right now, with a lot of that cooler air making its presence known. But back in the 50s, 1957 to be specifically, 100 degrees for the record yesterday. So very thankfully, we are well shy of those records. But it has been a dry stretch of weather ever since we really got out of Saturday morning. We haven't recorded any rain here at Middle Georgia Regional Airport. So your departure of rain continues to go down just a little bit each and every day, still 7 inches above average. We have a very nice cushion, like I've been continuing to mention, to go into another dry stretch, kind of like we did after Hurricane Helene, where we went about a month's time frame without recording any rain, and this number would still have a positive in front of it. Sunrise yesterday at 7:10, and now we finally got our first pre-8 p.m. sunset. So sunset was at 7:59 yesterday, and we'll continue to add a minute or subtract a minute to both of those times just about each and every day. The hours of daylight are definitely getting slimmer and slimmer, and throughout the month of September, we're going to lose somewhere around 60 to 70 minutes of daylight throughout the entire month. So a cool morning this morning, translating into a mostly sunny and another dry afternoon for your Tuesday. Northeasterly winds 5 to 15 miles per hour, so a slight downtick from what we saw yesterday, and a high temperature of 84 degrees, so continuing to be well below average, 6 degrees below average in fact, and these mostly sunny skies will allow for that warm up into the lower portion of the 80s as we go to around 3, 4, and 5 o'clock later on today. So let's talk about your heat index later on this afternoon. We did see it popping up some 85s, but 84, 85, basically the same thing. Your feels like numbers are still going to be very accurate of what the actual temperatures do read today, and that will last all afternoon long. And if you have any plans, the evening time frame is going to be an absolutely splendid time to have those plans. 83 down to 82 and 77 maybe by the time you're wrapping up any dinner plans that you have. And then as we go into the nighttime hours, already feeling like 70 degrees at 11 p.m. and we're going to be feeling like the 60s for most of the overnight hours. And that will continue into the early morning hours tomorrow as you wake up. Here's a look at your satellite and radar picture. We actually had a few sprinkle showers. They were very, very tiny just to the north of Thomaston early this morning. Many of you probably didn't even notice those as you made your way outside in Upson County. But all the cloud cover that we continue to watch build in from the west is continuing to dissipate. So it doesn't look like that's going to really limit the warm up per se. We do have plenty of cloud cover up to the north and the northwest of us, scattered cloud cover down towards the southwest, and a few clouds that are present in areas like Lamar County, Monroe County, getting down into Taylor County and portions of Dooley, Crisp, and Wilcox counties. But picking at straws when we talk about this satellite and radar image, there is really not many talking points whatsoever. So we don't see anything in the way of rain in the entire state of Georgia. Back up into northern Alabama, actually a couple of thunderstorms are present, and then you can continue to see a flash flood warning right there on the Louisiana and Mississippi state line right there along the Mississippi River, but areas farther over to the west, remember we were talking about the humidity levels. Those areas have a bit more of a humid atmosphere to work with as opposed to us here in the state of Georgia, South Carolina, and getting up into North Carolina. So our rain chances are going to be slim to none over the next couple of days. And you will see that scattered showers, even a couple of storms, are still present farther up to the northwest in areas like Birmingham throughout this afternoon. But us here in central Georgia, we continue to see that steady breeze coming out of the north and the northeast, passing cloud cover here and there, but nothing that's going to produce anything in the way of rain. And this is the latest model run of Future View. It's hinting at some more passing cloud cover than I saw with the last model run. Overall, it's still a relatively quiet picture. Now, as we go throughout the day on Wednesday, I still think we have a very slim 10% chance of seeing a brief drizzle or a mist shower. It's not going to amount to much. It's maybe just going to give you some water on your windshield that you can turn on the wiper blades for just a minute and hopefully wash off any of those bugs that you caught on the windshield for all of your Labor Day travel plans. Going into Wednesday evening, still trying to hold on to maybe a few minuscule rain chances, maybe even a passing light shower, but the chances of that are going to be better towards the north. Now let's go into Thursday, and this is going to be the day that our frontal boundary actually finally begins its passage through central Georgia. This is the morning hours, a few clouds in the picture, but overall nothing that's mostly cloudy or a really gloomy image to welcome you out the door. Some scattered light showers over to the west of us. Do they hold together as they come into central Georgia? And it looks like a couple of them very well could hold together. We'll see a bit of an uptick in the humidity levels by the time we go into Thursday, but overall it's not looking like anything substantial in the way of rain. I've maintained about a 20% chance of rain for your Thursday, and that will take us into the very end of the shortened work week and the shortened school week as we move into Friday. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we do have a very nice forecast for your Friday. But if you took today off and really enjoying maybe an extra day on top of the 3-day weekend you already had, have any last-minute Labor Day plans, your grillcast is still green spatulas all the way through this afternoon and into the evening hours, and we're not looking at anything in the way of those gusty winds to maybe just proceed with a little bit of caution like we did yesterday. It is an absolutely amazing forecast for being outside, enjoying some of those cooler temperatures, because we are going to see the numbers warm up as we go into the weekend. In fact, some of the warmest numbers that we have seen in maybe about 2 or 3 weeks here in central Georgia. So this is the last day I'm going to show your Labor Day travel forecast. We are expecting to see an uptick in the traffic throughout today. Kind of your typical traffic, and it's going to be mainly due to the combination of lots of folks heading back to work, so obviously the roads being more congested with that evening commute time, but also a couple of folks that are still filing in, coming back into town from their vacations over the last couple of days. So 3 to 7 p.m., probably the time frame that you want to avoid being on any of those major roadways. So Highway 247, getting into Highway 90, or not Highway 96, excuse me. You definitely don't want to be on 96 throughout today, anytime that you get to about the 3 to 5 o'clock window with all the base traffic. But then going into I-75 and I-16, those areas are probably going to be a bit more congested than usual, but still obviously not anything that you need to worry about as compared to Friday and Saturday, which were very heavy traffic days. And that started around noon and went all the way to the evening hours, around 6, maybe even into 8 o'clock in the evening on Friday. But 3 to 7 later on this afternoon, you should expect some above average traffic on the roads. So we will see that warming trend over the next 3 days. I showed you Future View. There's not much in the way of widespread rain. There's not much in the way of widespread cloud cover. I do have a 10% chance of maybe seeing a drizzle or a light shower tomorrow, but it's going to be very isolated. It's going to be like that speck we were talking about just north of Thomaston earlier this morning. Up to 86 for a high temperature, but still starting out the morning with a bit of a chill in the air, around 60 degrees, and a couple areas will probably take it a little bit farther and pop up a 58, maybe a 59 to kickstart tomorrow morning. Going into Thursday, 20% chance of a light shower, a stray light shower as you go into the afternoon and evening time frame. So that's going to be later in the day. We'll start out with plenty of sunshine on Thursday, and that will transition into some partly cloudy skies and a couple of showers that are on the satellite and radar picture. but overall not a very dominating force. And that's going to result in another warm up from Wednesday into Thursday, right there around 82 degrees, but still starting out with some cool air in the morning around 62 degrees. But 89 on Thursday is very, very close to the 90-degree mark. I wouldn't even doubt it if we hit the 90-degree mark as early as Thursday. The last time we have done that, August 25th, which was just over a week ago. It was last Monday. It does kind of feel like a long time ago. And we only popped up to 91 for one day, and then we entered the stretch of the 80s once again. So it was just one of those days where maybe we got some sufficient breaks in the cloud cover, and obviously that did allow for a bit more of a warm up than a couple other days where we were in the mid 80s. So 86 Wednesday, 89 on Thursday. If we don't hit the 90s on Thursday, we definitely will on Friday and Saturday. I have a forecasted high of 92 and then up to 94 on Saturday. So once you get up into those mid 90s, you start to wonder, okay, if we have some humidity in the forecast, is it going to make it feel like the triple digits? Well, we'll talk about that coming up in just a second. But the big thing is going to be a warming trend over the next 5 days. And then after that, we have some better news. That's around Sunday and Monday, but it is going to come with a bit of a catch. Now going into your morning lows, still a bit chilly the next 3 mornings, and then up to 65 on Friday and 68 starting out right on average for your Saturday morning. So it does look like we'll have some more clouds in the picture, or maybe just a general warming trend as that trough of cooler air does continue to slide over towards the east and we get back into more of a typical setup for this time of year. So speaking of the humidity levels, the good news is every day for the next 7 days, not looking overbearingly humid. It actually looks like we'll continue to see another drop in the humidity, getting some drier air for your Wednesday. And then as we go into Thursday, slight uptick and then another uptick into Friday, but then dropping the levels back down on Saturday. So Saturday, that forecasted high of 94 degrees. Right now, it looks like we're going to pair it up with some lower 60s and some mid 60s for the dew point temperatures. It might influence what it feels like by maybe a degree or two, but overall, it should be feeling pretty true to the actual temperature values each and every day for the foreseeable future. And then Sunday and Monday, we see a little bit of fluctuation. Maybe a slight increase in the moisture content as we go into Sunday, and then another drop as we go into Monday. And we have received a lot of good agreement so far that we are going to see a frontal boundary move through towards the end of the weekend. It's not going to be the same one that moves through on Thursday. So we have 2 fronts to talk about, the first of which will start to come through on Thursday, maybe not make its impacts known until we get into Saturday afternoon. And then front number 2 arrives Sunday into Monday, and that's also going to provide us with a reinforcing push of some cooler and some drier air, and it will knock your high temperatures down from the 90s once again. So right now, 8 p.m. on Friday, long-range models have remained pretty consistent, at least over the last 24 to maybe 36 hours. That rain chances for Friday are looking slim to none, and that would be very opportune because finally we could get a football Friday night forecast without having to tell you to bring the poncho, bring the umbrella, but it is going to be a little bit warmer out on the gridiron on Friday evening as opposed to the last 3 football Friday nights that we've had. Now let's go into Saturday, where you can get some signs of that front approaching from the north, and it does look like there's pretty good organization of some rain as you go up to the north and the northeast, but overall down here it really just looks like some broken showers, maybe a shower or 2 throughout Saturday. I have a really low rain chance for Saturday, but as that front begins its push down into the south and the southeast, it doesn't look to make that clean sweeping push through central Georgia really with a swift motion. It actually looks like it may stall somewhere down here in the southeast, and that's what's leading to the GFS at least hinting at some pretty widespread rain chances for Sunday afternoon and evening. But it remains to be seen if that front's actually going to push all the way through or if it's going to park itself. And by the time we get into Monday, it still kind of looks like a messy picture. Whether we get rain or not, obviously not too much agreement as we go into Monday afternoon and evening, but you can see the gray colors. They're pretty widespread, and it does look like cloud cover is going to play a pretty significant role for at least keeping our temperatures a little bit lower on Monday. And then we go into Tuesday, and it is still just spilled paint all over your long-range models. Green in the GFS says, okay, we'll hold on to the rain in the state of Georgia, but the blue, according to the European, has most of that rain off the Atlantic coast and actually getting a really good definitive line of where that frontal boundary is sitting, because you can see that it is draped all across the southeastern United States. Florida obviously not going to get the passage of that front, but it does look like it could be a bit of a messier picture as we go into the beginning of next week. Not a bad thing because it will result in another cool down. So let's take a look at your tropics outlook. You may have noticed a change in color with this potential area of development moving off the western coast of Africa, and that is because we now have an uptick in the chances of development not only over the next 2 days, but also over the next 7 days. So when you get chances of development anywhere from about 10 to 20 and 30%, that's where you're going to get your yellow shaded areas. So that's highlighting your slight chances or your slim chances of development. 40, 50, and 60% chance of development, that's going to be your orange color. So you're getting into moderate chances of development. But then 70, 80, and 90 are going to be your high chances of development, and that's going to be your red shaded area. So if either of the next 2 days or the next 7 days pops up with those percentages, that's where you'll see the color change on this tropics outlook. So 70% chance of developing over the course of the next week. It does look very likely that this will form into our next named storm as it does trek across the Atlantic Ocean. And this does make sense because you can see maybe some faint hints of Saharan dust off the western coast of Africa, but overall it's not as dominating in nature as it once was maybe about a week ago or 2 weeks ago. We've really had a lot of Saharan dust present in the eastern Atlantic Ocean, and it doesn't look like too much of that dust is present much longer. But there is a 30% chance of development over the next 48 hours, so that's an uptick from what we saw at about maybe 10% yesterday or 0. Can't even remember what the percentage chance of development was, but overall this is still nothing you need to worry about as of right now. And if this is to even have a very fast motion across the Atlantic Ocean, we do have 2 frontal boundaries coming through, and those are going to act as a steering mechanism along with a high pressure center that's out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It does look very likely that whatever does form right here is going to kind of take a very similar path to our last 2 storms, and that would be Ferdinand and that would also be Aaron. So having to backtrack and just double check myself because those are the last 2 storm names that we received. It's been quite some time since we talked about either, but they did kind of take that northward turn and then eventually went out into the northeast in the northern Atlantic Ocean. Right now it does look like this system has a good likelihood of seeing this shaded area move up to the north because of those blocking and steering mechanisms that we have in the form of those frontal boundaries. But if we are to see those frontal boundaries kind of fall apart and not necessarily act as much of a steering mechanism, that could be a scenario where this would continue its westward push. It's just something we'll continue to keep an eye on, but like I said, it has good chances of developing into the next named storm, and if it is to have any impacts here in the southeast United States, that would be about a week out, maybe even a week and a half into the future. So really going to be a long time before we even have to discuss more with that potential area of development. But like I said, it does look very likely that we'll get a named storm with it. This would be our 7th named storm of the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season, which we are far behind the Pacific if you've been paying any attention to that. I think there's somewhere around J and K already. They got a pretty early start to the hurricane season over there in the Pacific, and you can see Gabrielle is going to be the next name that we do have on the list. And then after that, we'll move over to the second column of names where there are 8 more names on the list. And then our last column over here, the last 8 names. Right now, the pace we're going doesn't look like we'll really even get close to this very last column, this third column over here. But again, I continue to mention it because we did see it as recently as last year. We had a very quiet month of August, and then once we moved into the month of September, hurricane season really got going. And right now, yes, we have that one wave moving off the coast of Africa. In a couple of days, we could very well have another moving off the coast of Africa, but we have to continue to monitor not only the Atlantic Ocean, but the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf, because we can see systems form in those 2 basins, especially along with how warm their waters are, those sea surface temperatures, and that's a prime ingredient for tropical development. When you have really warm sea surface temperatures and you have a lack of wind shear, so that's winds at different speeds at different levels of the atmosphere, that's obviously going to disrupt the flow if the winds are moving a little bit faster at one level of the atmosphere as opposed to maybe a little bit farther down. So when you have a lack of shear, you have some warm surface temperatures and the lack of Saharan dust, that kind of becomes a prime ingredient for some tropical development. But like I said, still nothing to worry about in the near future, really the whole week that we do have ahead. So we'll continue to focus on the forecast that we are dealt with. And that's going to be one with a warming trend. And it looks like the 90s are going to be here to stay all weekend long, but this is going to be fairly short-lived. You see 94 on Saturday, down to 91 on Sunday, and then 87 on Monday. So this could be due to the combination of maybe some cooler and drier air trying to filter in, but as of right now, the long-range models are making it seem like it's mainly going to be due to some increased rain chances and, at the very least, some increased cloud cover all over central Georgia. So whichever one of these factors does contribute to the cool down, doesn't really matter in retrospect because it will be a cool down. Obviously, we'll just tell you to bring the raincoat and break it out of the closet like we were doing very, very frequently at the beginning of your Labor Day weekend. And the chances are relatively low as of right now. We'll probably see an uptick in those if we continue to see agreement amongst those long-range models. But I would say Monday and really just Monday. Monday is probably going to be your best chance at receiving some rain. I have that 20% chance, so it's the same chance of rain Thursday as we do have for Monday. But overall, the chances of rain are going to be very scattered in nature throughout Thursday. And if you catch anything in the way of rain, maybe it'll cool those numbers down slightly, and it won't allow you to reach that 90-degree mark as we go into Thursday towards the end of the work week, at least the end of the midweek, and we'll continue to warm up. Football Friday night, going to be a little bit warmer. High of 92. Humidity might be influencing what the feels like number is, maybe around 94 or 95 degrees. So obviously make sure that you're drinking lots of water. It's definitely not the hottest that we have been and the hottest that we have seen in the past beginning weeks of September, but the weather is all kind of relative to what you have been feeling. And what you have been feeling are below average temperatures in the 80s and some cool mornings that have been feeling nice and pleasant, a bit of a taste of fall, a little bit premature. So obviously Friday would be a bit of an exception, something we haven't felt in quite some time. So it will be a little bit of a catch, but I kind of like the 7-day forecast because some people are fans of the cooler weather. Some people like to hold on to that last little bit of summer as long as you can. This is going to satisfy both parties with the cool mornings the next couple of days, and then the afternoons, Friday and Saturday, should be quite a treat for any outdoor plans that you do have in terms of number one, having some dry weather, and number two, having some of those warmer temperatures if you do really enjoy some of the summertime heat. So that's all we have to cover here on your extended forecast. We'll be back here with another update at 10:30 tomorrow. And obviously we'll be keeping a close eye on the tropics if we are to get our next named storm, which once again will be Gabrielle. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you here tomorrow.